I'm Tommy Hayes. I'm the Transportation Policy Manager at Lyft, and I'm part of a fairly new team that focuses especially on transit impact, working with MPOs as well as environmental groups to figure out how are we fitting into this rapidly evolving ecosystem of so many shared modes, and kind of what is the big picture connecting dots, from A all the way to E, which is sometimes kind of a longer term look. And I was really interested to hear some of these preliminary findings on GetAround, because we're kind of at a similar stage with ride sharing. So this is, I think, being so new to Portland, an opportunity to kind of introduce Lyft and tell you a little bit about where we came from. And I think it's instructive in seeing where I see us going, which may not be exactly what people think. So this is the very, stock slide that my boss, the Director of Transportation Policy, and I always use. And this is sort of the core motivation for Lyft's founding, which is basically that bundled up in the massively underutilized resource of empty seats in cars are traffic congestion problems, air pollution problems, just this huge inefficiency that on the one hand seems like an obvious opportunity to extract gains from, but also carpooling has been declining for 30 years since the oil crisis, and I'll get into a bit about why mainstreaming carpooling is so hard and why it's so worth it. Things that I think probably most people in this room are intimately familiar with. The development patterns in the US are not very conducive to most people being able to take transit very regularly or efficiently. As a result, we have a very car-based transportation scheme that results in just the hours wasted and the economic impacts of traffic congestion alone, just staggering numbers. And then finally, if we want to, widen our highways to kind of build ourselves out of this rut that we're in along the same lines that we've been going, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. So Lyft's co-founders actually launched a different company back in 2007. Has anybody heard of Zimride? Ooh, it's the best reaction I've ever gotten to that question. So in 2007, Logan Green, who's driving here, was coming out of school in Santa Barbara. He was the youngest member of the transit board there, and had grown up in Los Angeles, just utterly frustrated at traffic. He had that moment we've all had in traffic, you just snap because you're in gridlock. I think that happens more often in Los Angeles than many other places, but he was looking at that resource as something he wanted to tackle. Meanwhile, John Zimmer in the back seat had just graduated from Cornell's Hotel and Hospitality School and had been trained to think, in terms of occupancy rates as, kind of the metric that you judge yourself in the hotel industry. And if you look at an 80%, vacancy rate in vehicles, you're doing pretty bad. So the two met and they first launched Zimride, which was a web-based, prearranged kind of carpooling service from city to city. So a longer haul. Very popular on college campuses, San Luis Obispo to Los Angeles, and actually Oregon had some pretty healthy Zimride chapters I discovered, but it kind of cooked along for 5 years, but never really took off. And the game changer was really smartphones and the GPS in our pockets that enabled on-demand, location-based kind of serendipitous matching of drivers and passengers. But they weren't really all the way there yet, because carpooling faces two classic challenges, and all of the researchers out there have kind of pointed to the fact that the hurdles to overcome include stranger danger, the reluctance to hop in a car with somebody you don't know. I mean, what's the first thing your parents tell you when you're a kid is don't get in a car with a stranger. And also, and this is really key, reliability and wait time. I think there have been a lot of attempts, and there are a lot of programs out there meant to organically match drivers and passengers to share commutes, or be efficient about carpooling. But the moment that you try to opt in and try to either get a ride or give a ride and it doesn't work, you just never go back. And so behaviorally, that has been a really difficult nut to crack. And so with smartphones and with, the ability to see that somebody's coming and see that, their face, their vehicle, their star rating, because we have a two-way rating system that lets people know kind of how safe, clean, friendly, the experience was. We've kind of, in tandem, been able to tackle both of those things. And so Lyft has, since day one, been a very kind of proud member of the sharing economy, which is, something that was really key to our launch, was kind of this all boats rise, this general awareness and comfort with sharing resources that other people own. And the technology, which I covered and I'll get a little bit more into. And so I should mention that we have three types of Lyft rides. And so the two on the outer end are what we have in Portland and what most people in the United States have access to, which is, we call it Lyft Classic, which is a driver is available to give me a ride wherever I want. I just basically say, here I am, I'm at PSU, and when you come pick me up, I'll tell you where we're going, or I can put my destination in if I want to be helpful, and then we're off and running. I want to talk about Lyft Line next, because this is kind of the next evolution of Lyft that is kind of the thing that compelled me to join and to leave the environmental world and go work for this company, because I think it's really walking the walk and taking a very bold step towards mainstreaming carpooling. And Lyft Plus is if you've got quite a crowd and you need an SUV. So I always feel bad dangling Lyft Line in front of cities that don't have it yet, but I think Portland will one day be a perfect market for Lyft Line, just kind of because of its population, because of the way it's set up, and I'm hoping it's not too far away. But this is a San Francisco stat that a year ago, before we launched Lyft Line, we were waiting and watching kind of the liquidity, the density of ride activity start to build up to the point where 90% of Lyft rides had another ride sort of shadowing it within 5 minutes or less. And so that told us that we could probably comfortably flip on Lyft Line, which is the version of the app where different parties are matched to share a vehicle going a similar route. And so just to offer a visual, this was me over the weekend. I'm in the car. I had actually just hopped in the car at my house. You all know where I live now. And I plugged in my destination. I was going for a swim. And in a minute, the app found a neighbor of mine, Audrey, who was going to pick up her new bike at the bike shop in the Temescal. And we got matched for a ride that potentially we would have taken in separate cars otherwise. But we get matched. We're both offered a small fare discount, so there's a little bit of an incentive. And then, just look at Hat Route. And then we get dropped off. There's hardly any delay. I think the app says, we'll give you a minute or two of detour at most, but otherwise it's very seamless. And Lyft guarantees the driver will make the same amount, even if I don't get matched. So you don't get matched in every case. Sometimes if you're doing a strange route or it's, odd hour of the day, you may end up getting kind of a private ride for a discount. And we eat the cost in between because we are betting on, there's a likelihood of a match happening and having it pencil out. So having that density is what's really key for us to be able to confidently flip Lyft Line on. A place like Portland where we're still so new, it's just far from economically sensible right now. But as we grow, we hope to get to the point where we're kind of servicing this option. And our fantasy is that every ride someday will be a Lyft Line ride. I think that's very possible given how many vehicles are driving around at all times in America. So I don't actually think it's that audacious, but it's been really hard to get to the point of being able to flip that on. And everything we had to do beforehand, building up kind of a driver base and all the marketing and all the magenta, has been leading towards this. So it's been adopted very, very enthusiastically. It's actually 60% of our rides in San Francisco are Lyft Line rides. New York just hit that same number, in fact. And we also have it in Los Angeles and in Austin, Texas today. So the other thing I'll mention too is that we've been fiddling and trying to innovate with, it's great to match a couple of parties for a car that's going the same way. Now what happens is when you hop in the car, you request your Lyft Line, it asks you up front, are you one person or are you two people? Do you have a friend with you? And the most you can have is two. And then it'll ask the next person the same thing. So the app knows if that car has an extra seat still in it after making those two matches, and it makes it available for a third match. And so we've actually had 1 in 5 of our Lyft lines in San Francisco be triple match, which is a very full car, but everybody's getting a discount. The driver's at that point getting a little more, and you could conceive of the traffic congestion and VMT reductions possible when you're really making the most of these resources. So the other part of my job has really been looking at what is Lyft doing in sort of this first mile, last mile world. This is this classic problem in public transportation, and I think that a lot of the shared modes that are out there now in tandem are presenting a compelling alternative to car ownership, because we now have so many different ways of getting around when we leave our house in the morning, when we leave work. If we have to do kind of a triangular trip, there's kind of a solution for every little trip that does not mean you're driving by yourself in the car that you own. And transit's a huge part of that. And our CEO was recently on stage, was asked a question, do you feel like you're trying to replace public transit? Are you guys cannibalizing transit? Kind of a zesty question. And he responded without flinching, we do better in a city with good transit. We are very much supportive of transportation funding. If there is a good backbone transit infrastructure in a city, we only do better because we're kind of in the fight against car ownership with all the other options. And so we have basically kind of had to reframe what some of the headlines would have you think is our world domination plan or something, because in fact, we are very excited about proactively being supportive of things like funding for transit, bike share, policy that's conducive to car sharing as well. And so this is how we see ourselves as part of this ecosystem. And on kind of, in the pie of how people get around in America, it's something like 95% of people just drive alone. That's, their main form. And that sliver, that 5% of all the other options is not the market that anybody's salivating over. It's growing that crescent and basically eating into car ownership. I think that's a much more exciting space. So before we got really proactive with engaging transit agencies and saying, hey, we'd like to start thinking about some meaningful partnerships and seeing how we can work together, we did a quick look in the Bay Area, which was our first market and certainly our most robust, at Lyft activity and how it's interacting with transit. And so we basically overlaid the Caltrain system, which goes from San Francisco down to Silicon Valley, and we said what fraction of our rides are starting or ending like right on those points on the map. And we found 22% of all of our rides, which is a lot of rides from San Francisco down to Silicon Valley, appear to be connecting to Caltrain, which is a commuter train. And then we thought, well, that's pretty interesting. That's encouraging. Let's look at BART and expand the look into the East Bay area, which is Oakland and Berkeley, and the number was 24%. And so that kind of organic interaction, people using Lyft the way I would hope that they would and connect for longer, like multimodal trips with transit, got us to the point where we thought, okay, we should really launch a team that focuses on proactively going and speaking with transit agencies and saying, what are your constraints? What are the stations that you have parking problems? What are the peak hours that you'd like help smoothing because everybody's commuting all at once and racing for those parking spaces that fill up at 7 in the morning. There's a lot of really interesting conversations going on now with transit, and not just in the Bay Area. The other thing I wanted to mention is, the accessibility and equity piece has been definitely one of the biggest questions that has, comes up kind of city by city. And one of the places that really asked us and our competitor to produce some numbers on was, how are you serving in Chicago? And so we looked at basically our ride activity in 2013 internally and said, yeah, how is that going? There's this population of early adopters out there in every market that are young and inclined to have the latest app and all that, and we see them taking Lyft when we first launch, no problem. They don't need any introduction, and they're all over it. But if you look at a year later in a market like Chicago, and we've seen this in other cities as well, the penetration into all sorts of neighborhoods, kind of crossing socioeconomic and geographic lines, has been extremely encouraging and we're actively looking into this right now as well, getting kind of deeper in the data to figure out what is it that works, in getting Lyft service into transit underserved areas, impoverished neighborhoods. And I think a big factor is that you now have kind of a bunch of people who, if they have a car and it passes the vehicle inspection and they pass a background check and DMV check and all that, as long as their car is, I think, 11 years old or younger, they can be a Lyft driver. And now they are co-located with people in their neighborhood who may be requesting rides, neighborhoods that it's darn impossible to get a cab, neighborhoods that it might be just a little far from frequent or reliable transit, and now they have a new option. And so I'm really excited to see where this goes. This is not actually squarely in my portfolio, but it comes up, all the time as to how is this playing out? And we're watching very actively, and so far we're encouraged. So I mentioned that I kind of have two parts of my job, one of them being looking at the occupancy rate of our vehicles and having Lyftline come together and start putting people into cars to actually share the ride. And I also mentioned our kind of transit connectivity piece and how are we complementing transit. Sometimes those two pieces come together in a beautiful way. And I'm going to show you a graphic that one of our engineers sent us. I know Jason has seen this, where basically you have the best of both worlds. And this is a snapshot of a ride given in the Mission in San Francisco. In the lower left, those green dots are the pickup points for 3 different people that are sharing a ride, maybe 4 people if somebody had a friend, sharing the ride along the orange route, and then all 3 getting dropped off. And what that is the 22nd Street Caltrain station. It's kind of marooned in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of like a tumbleweeds neighborhood right now, and it's not got great transit service, but it is basically like a great way to get down to Palo Alto, Mountain View, all these places that have huge employers. And what they're doing in process is they're actually bypassing the 101 highway, which is like one of the most congested highways in the country. It's basically like emergency status with how much traffic is on the 101, and getting people instead to take transit from a station that they would otherwise have a pretty difficult time getting to is a very promising thing. And I think you can start to imagine the VMT reductions possible, the greenhouse gas reductions possible when you shift people's behavior by giving them an appealing alternative like this for their commute. So just a quick sneak peek. There's kind of a new feature in our app in San Francisco that's somewhat in stealth mode, but it's called Driver Destination. And this is the holy grail for the future we want to create. And that is, when you are an approved Lyft driver, you're typically in driver mode and you're availing yourself of anybody who wants to go wherever they want. But with Driver Destination, what you do is you say, all right, I'm here, I'm going there, I'm going to Costco, I'm going to work, whatever it be. And it sets up your route, and then it will filter requests to allow you to pick up anybody along your corridor. And so that is a true incidental rideshare. That's a real carpool, and that's what we're trying to build towards, is kind of an ecosystem where people may not need cars, but those of us who have them and need to drive them will basically be making the seats in our car available at all times if we're making a trip. There's a financial incentive. We hope that will be compelling to really, really take a bite out of the VMTs and greenhouse gases associated with personal vehicle transport. So I just wanted to give a quick kind of the lifeline of our interaction in cities when we arrive. And Portland's an interesting one because we're quite new here compared to many of our other markets. And we're kind of at this first stage of regulation, figuring out what are the policies that are going to govern, this new industry. It's often in the headlines. It's often very contentious seeming. But in, I think, 30 states across the country, we now have TNC regulation that has given us clear authority, kind of, a very trusted kind of framework for us to operate. And once we have that built in, then we get to kind of do the more fun stuff. And that's when I get to come in behind the policy managers who have, the much more testy conversations, it would seem. And then I get to come in and talk to the regional planners and say, hey, now that we've been operating and we have clear license to do so, how can I help you kind of illustrate our activities? And you can help model them into your regional transportation plans, et cetera. We've begun doing that in some various places, and have been getting some of the feedback now about how helpful it has been to be able to model this new activity that's not quite like a taxi, it's not quite like anything that's been, modeled before. And so we're at that phase in a number of markets right now. And then finally, I think the public sector's role is to figure out how do we proactively and thoughtfully partner. I think Portland will be a fantastic place because it has such innovative bureaus of transportations, transit agencies that are really thinking about outcomes and really thinking about how can we improve mobility for everybody in Portland. And so stay tuned. I think the partnership element is soon going to be a really exciting place. And I think a lot of cities will be announcing kind of creative and meaningful ways that they've partnered with shared mobility options. And then finally, just on the environmental piece, this is a question that comes up a lot with ride sharing is, are you putting more cars on the road? Are you, how are you playing in this, ecosystem of options? The jury is kind of out because the research is only now being undertaken. And recently I was in Sacramento lobbying for some environmental bills based on petroleum reduction goals to say, we are very confident that the net impact of our operations are kind of a secret weapon in the fight against, petroleum use, car ownership, low occupancy vehicle trips. And there was an op-ed just a couple of weeks ago from UC Berkeley's Susan Shaheen, who is kind of the thought leader, kind of has done the seminal research on much of the car sharing impacts and has started to take a look at ride sharing. And she published this op-ed to say, hey, policymakers, you need to be thinking big picture about this new model. And we're really excited to see where this goes. I think that partnering with cities and regions on their climate objectives will be a big part of my job in the years to come. And this is a map of our coverage area in Portland. And, just to take a step back and say that we are still very new here. And the things that, I get excited about seeing as we kind of build up density, they're coming. And as we've only been here for a few months, I've been really, really encouraged at the reception we've had, the growth that we've seen. I think Portland is a really lifty town, or maybe Lyft is a really like Portlandia type company, where culturally kind of embracing shared resources and really thinking differently about the way we get around is, I think it's a city that could really do a lot to teach other cities the way it already has, basically. So with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker. Look forward to questions. Thanks.